It took about, wait, that was a question? How long?
No, Diane,
You left there.
Diane,
You left
Just
Tuesday,
watch.
but we ended on Wednesday because of the time.
I'm ready when you are.
Okay, it's 5:30, folks, and I'd like to call to order the Curriculum and Student Development Committee of the Madison Board of Education. I'm Stephen Finn, and I'm joined by our other members, Kathy Miller and Mary Ann Connolly, as well as our Assistant Superintendent, Gail Dowling-Hench, and our Superintendent, Dr. Craig Cook. We have a couple items on our agenda tonight. At this point, I'll turn it over to our Assistant Superintendent to present our agenda and the people who will be making presentations to us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time and attention. I just have to start by acknowledging the two presenters tonight. Jenna Guzzi is 9 through 12 World Language Coordinator, and Leslie Lopez is K through 8 World Language Coordinator. And these two women are so hardworking, so incredible as their professionalism, and they have actually just been incredibly flexible for us too. This is the third rescheduling of this meeting. So they were ready like in January. And here it is March, and every time we had a snowstorm, I'm like, hey, so like, are you free this date? And they're just always like, sure, gal, you know. And I deeply appreciate that. Not only your flexibility, but the work that you're seeing tonight is work that is a renewal cycle for world language. So they've gone through their first adoption years ago, and now this is an opportunity for them to take a deep look and go back into the units that we've done and work with their departments to say, how many units do we want to revise? Why do we want to revise them? And I think the most beautiful part of the conversation for me and working with the two of you is that our curriculum is working. So a lot of the work that they're doing on the units is actually lifting them higher, like making them richer, because the kids are coming in more proficient because they have access to an ongoing curriculum. So it was really exciting. So some of the complexity you'll see tonight. So thank you both again. You are wonderful humans. And I don't know how they dedicated so much of their last summer and all school year to bring to you all of the revisions that we have before us. So, and did their other job, which is coordinator and talk. So thank you both.
And run marathons.
And run marathons. All of it. And coach.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Hello, coaching.
You know, coaching too. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, no, go ahead. Thank you for having us. It's finally kind of a nice little turnover to get these units, first of all, adopted into the program that we have existing, but more importantly, to be actually doing them. So I will start first since I'm K-8, if you don't mind. What we would like to show you over here on the board is that we have our curriculum unit that we have set for kindergarten through 8th grade. We've revised several units for each grade level. Also creating new units for grades 1 to 3. And that's why we have 3 units per each grade level going into 3rd grade, and then 6th and 8th. There's an extra unit in 8th grade. And for French, we have 4 units for that for 7th grade. We are currently working on 8th grade curriculum, so that will come later in June, along with 7th grade Spanish.
Okay, and for the high school, I just have to say that when I said to my department, what do we want to do? I mean, the list was such a laundry list, like their professionalism and dedication. I know you had the same, but it's really to be admired. And I really want to take a minute to thank the board for supporting the work and allowing us the funding and the space to write our own curriculum and to own that, because it's really working for our students, as you'll see later in the presentation. And I know it takes a big dedication, so you know it matters and your support, so thank you for that.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so we had a lot of revisions in Spanish and French. Those kind of mirror each other. Many of them are just tweaks, and then Mandarin and Latin both adopted new textbooks, so the revisions are a reflection of that. And this summer we will be working on ASL 2 and Latin 2, as a continuum of that one.
So we were looking from like a whole scope and sequence between kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade, and we were looking at to see if there's what the major themes and structures for each section, and more particularly the focus is on each building. So at the elementary level, we have, you'll notice some different themes of exploration, exploring cultural awareness, you know, weather. Those are in isolation, but they're very depth in the sense of that there's a lot of repetition through units, and that the units kind of continue and carry throughout the remainder of the year, working on high frequency words, looking at those structures, remaining in the present tense, using concepts and strategies that we call comprehensible input, as well as all of those lovely acronyms that we have underneath there. TPRS, TPR, those are two different things. Teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling is TPRS, and then total physical response is TPR. The bigger thing that we focus at the elementary level is really the Super 7 verbs, which are recycled throughout all.
So you can say almost
So,
anything
yeah, all grade
awkwardly
levels.
with those 7 words.
Exactly, your message will get understood.
Yes.
As we move into the middle school, and I don't have the 4 or 5 because Brown is under construction as we speak, so we're working on those units currently. But with the middle school, we have also looking at where we can spiral these units and the content throughout the K-8 perspective, that trajectory. So what we're looking at is having students focusing on themselves, talking about themselves in the first person, but also in third person. And you'll notice that we start to introduce those concepts in the present tense. And really, storytelling is a very big concept, whether it's reading stories like mini stories, or whether it's students creating their own mini stories. And then we move and transition into the past tense as we get into the upper grades, which is typically in 8th grade. We're looking at more specifically, which is going to segue into the high school concept of agreements. And there's a lot of agreements there with making sure that students understand, especially in particular languages like the ones that we are focusing on in Spanish and French, that there are gender specific vocabulary. So students need to know that. It's just taught, it's not like an understood concept. So while we do that, we transition into teaching them those concepts so that they can learn that and continue to explore that at the high school level.
And then when we get into high school, becomes a little bit muddier because we have the honors and the level 2 classes, but I tried to just kind of catch a snapshot. So, you know, for any course, or we have a theme, right, a thematic concept that is looked at. So I just put the ones that kind of overlap for the honors and the level 2 classes, and then the structures that accompany those. As Leslie mentioned, comprehensible input is a huge concept in world language and language acquisition. And that's about, you know, whatever the teacher says, whatever the student is reading, we want it to be comprehensible, right? That's about the input skills. And as we look at our vertical balance from K through 12, we want that production versus like the input versus output to start to balance, right? So in kindergarten, almost all that production of language is coming from the teacher. And as we go up, the students are producing more and more. And that's how we see our proficiency scales. We're looking for students to go from being able to speak with 1-word responses to sentences to paragraph length discourse. And then once they can do that, we want them to be able to do that with a new set of vocabulary and new set of structures and sort of expanding that. So that's what we're really looking at. The subjunctive is a concept that is really the biggest change that has happened in this curricular revision is that we started the introduction of the subjunctive earlier. It's a very important concept in Spanish. It's very, very difficult for English speakers because we don't do it very much in English. And so we started introducing it earlier, but in smaller bites. So, and you know, in ways that are comprehensible and are seeing very good results.
So these are some highlighted notes that we wanted to talk about with regards to the K-8 revisions that we've been working on in the units. Formally through the kindergarten to 3rd grade elementary program, we only had 2 units. And the outline was, now that we were moving into a trimester, which we have that model anyway, we wanted to create a PBA, a performance-based assessment for each trimester, so that students were being measured each trimester at their grade level. As we progress into middle school, we also started to look at how the model of sixth grade has changed and shifted from an everyday teaching concept to an every other day. So because of that, although we were teaching our content and some of that information wasn't continued because of the year had ended, we started to modify and look at what were the key factors of that, our curriculum program. And then we looked at that using the trimester model of having 3 units, 1 unit for each trimester. And going ahead and revising that. As we looked at our 8th grade units, we talked about looking at just the natural progression of the structures presented in each unit, making sure that as the students were graduating, essentially, they were prepared to go and enter the high school. Finally, we have there for the overall, we have some updated PBA capacities that we wanted to include. Self-direction was a big one that we wanted to address, and that's addressing all grade levels and as well as global thinking. We pick that up in specific grade levels, but not in all.
And at the high school, again, with multiple languages, it's a little different in each of them. But across the board in all 4 languages that are presented this evening, there was an effort made to really look at the depth of knowledge in the PBAs. And just as a reminder to anyone who may be listening, right, the performance-based assessments are required in every unit, and this is something that's more about the student's ability to apply their learning, rather than just have something that's based on rote memorization, and that there should be a targeted audience that's specific to the theme. So in all of them, we've tried to just look at them and make sure that that's what we're doing, right? That it is a performance-based assessment. It's looking at what the students can do with limited notes or controlled environment. And so it's a little bit more on the spot, more spontaneous, and a higher level of depth of knowledge. I'll get into a little bit more of that later. For Latin, as I mentioned, we adopted a new textbook, which is Superani. That was because the previous textbook we didn't think handled some of the race and equity in a responsible and respectful way. So Superani was, reputed to do that very well and still maintain cultural accuracy. Most of the thematic units, actually I think all the thematic units were kept the same. And just the vocabulary and some of the cultural content from Superani was woven in. Additionally, our Latin teacher had participated in the innovation lab several years ago, and some of the work done there had never made its way all the way into EduPlanet. So now we've updated that as well. And Mandarin 1 through 3, additionally, this was the adoption of a new textbook. This is to correspond with the integrated Chinese textbook, which was already being used in Mandarin 4 honors for the UConn class. And that, so to have the same series in all 4 levels made a lot of sense. And when we first started Chinese, 15 years ago, this didn't exist. And what we had was essentially a middle school level textbook. So to replace that was a much needed change. So it's more high school appropriate, and it's also getting them to much more rigorous structures at an earlier in the courses. So we did all of those in one go, but Latin is going year by year and taking it from there. And then Spanish 2, 4, and 5 were pretty minor revisions, mostly just to make the PBAs, as I said, more application based or that higher depth of knowledge. In some cases, we just changed the country or a bit of the cultural concept. There were 2 units in a row in Spanish 5 that were based in Spain, and the students got bored. So even though it was a new aspect, it was just, so we just made that adjustment to keep them engaged. Bigger changes were made in Spanish 3 and French 3, as well as 4 honors in both of those languages. We removed the first unit of Spanish 3 and French 3 because essentially we felt that the transition from 8th grade to 9th grade was not enough. Actually, it was too easy. And everyone was getting A's, and we were like, well, then we're not challenging them enough. So we removed the first unit. We really looked at it and said, they're having so much review, and almost the first 3 units were review, which is just too much. Even though it was review plus, right? There was certainly some new learning. It didn't feel that way to the students. So we adjusted that, so they're getting something that feels brand new to them from very early on, although it still includes some review information. And we also, so we took out that very first unit and we replaced it, even though it's unit 2. It's health and wellness, and we just thought as a topic that title of the course is, or the unit is actually protecting our health. And this is where we're first introducing the subjunctive, which is about making recommendations. It's the phrases like, it is important that, it's necessary that, it's suggested that, it's right, it's all within personal expressions and making recommendations, so. It's sort of a gentle introduction to the subjunctive, which, as I said, is really challenging. And then Spanish 4 honors and French 4 honors, we reduced from 6 units to 4 units, which might seem like we took out content, but I promise you we did not. Those courses are packed. What we really did was buy back some instructional time. We looked at our 6 PBAs and said, these are eating up too much class time and we don't need to assess them in this level of intensity this often. So we reduced 2 of the PBAs, we took out, simplified them and made them transfer tasks. They're still in there. But it meant that we could do more authentic PBAs. And really we got back like 3 or 4 days of instructional time in each trimester, which is a really big deal. So everything is still there. Those are the thematic units are mirrored in the AP units. And we kind of combined them, right? There was families and traditions, and then there was contemporary life, so we made it contemporary families and kind of just combined 2 units into one, so that they're still hitting all those big themes, getting the introduction to vocabulary.
Here we have just basically a profile of all the capacities that we're working on from a K-12 perspective. And you'll notice across the board, product creation is the one that stands out. And the reason is because we expect our students to use the tools that we've been teaching them, and regardless of the level. Obviously at the lower levels it's a little bit different, where we're asking them to simplify or looking at the specific skill set and creating tasks, hence the comprehensible input strategy that we had mentioned earlier. And as we kind of release that responsibility of us teaching and let students absorbing, they need to create and produce them themselves. So you'll notice that that's a very common thread capacity that we have throughout. And then you see throughout it's sprinkled between all those different 5 categories, which is I think for us is impressive because we wanted to have that spread. And as you progress towards the right, which you're in the high school, you'll see how it scatters even more. And that's kind of what we want. We want to be able to lean away from, they're constantly always analyzing, but we want them to create. We want them to produce. We want them to do something and that performance-based task.
No, absolutely, I would reiterate that, right? And that you see when we get, into the high school, we can get some of those more, I always think of citizenship as, sort of the peak of that capstone of skills that they're working on. So when you're getting towards the upper level classes, we're seeing a bit more of that. Production stands without because they have to produce a response in order for us to, see it. So we certainly have a lot of product creation. And, as they start to be able to have interpersonal conversation, we can get more of the collective intelligence. It's really hard to do at the lower levels where it's more, teacher producing and like that student response. So, yeah, I agree, but I think, we really do try to have a spread as much as we can and take it from there.
Thank you. Here we just have a glimpse of what a self-awareness tracker looks like in the middle school. This is something that we implemented last year. And kudos to my counterpart, who's another Leslie Sperling, my French counterpart, our teacher there. She and I worked on creating a way to measure students' ability to understand their own progress. So this tracker really is more of like a journal reflection for them to complete while they're working on this task. So there's some like basic areas that we talk about with regards to what's your progress, if you've met any roadblocks, if you have a win, what was that? What was your daily kind of check-in? And you'll notice that there's an opportunity for students to jot down their opinions or thoughts. And then as a teacher, you can look at that information and say, okay, well, this is an area of weakness. What could you do to make that better? What strategies do you know? And sometimes this is an individual reflection, but it could be a collaborative assignment. So although we're working together, this student is particularly looking at specific things that they're working on in this unit that, what can I describe myself to be like, I'm happy with what I produced. I don't like what, I see, or maybe this relationship between my partner and I is not working. I'm getting frustrated. I feel like I'm doing the brunt of the work or not, or I don't understand what we're doing. This is a great opportunity for students to be able to reflect and talk about their progress in this particular task.
How often does that happen?
That's a very good question. I wish it happened all the time. I can't say, this is something that we're training our sixth grade students to be able to do at the end of the year. So they, let's say they quote unquote have mastered this concept, because once they hit seventh grade, they have the opportunity to take French. So now they have Spanish and French, so that exposure will exist in seventh and eighth grade French and Spanish. So the opportunity is there. We do daily, I should say daily, let me take that back, because sixth grade isn't daily anymore, but we have notebooks, we have journals the students have in the classroom. So they're constantly assessing themselves and their work. But this is something that's really focused on the capacity alone and this particular task. So what's kind of nice about that is we see them, there's an evolution over time using their, their notebooks that they can write their notes, etc. That we have constant communication between the student and ourselves. But this is an additional thing that we do, especially when it's a structured task.
Is it required or?
Well, if this is part of the capacity, this is required. So this becomes, it could be double-sided, several pages, however many days it really does take for the students to work and complete this. So this can be multiple pages, yeah. It's a great piece because we want to pre-expose our students as young as we can, right, to this information and being able to take ownership of their learning. So that's bigger picture that we're looking at that information and then we say, okay, we can, here you go, we give it back, and then they can see based off of the rubric how they did, individually, because we may be working on an assignments together, we might have a common grade, but this is an individual grade.
That's helpful. I mean, really, what I was looking for is to what degree are the students self-monitoring? This is just one instrument, but if they do the journals and other things, so that's
Yeah, that's it.
built-in process.
And that's the expectation, especially, we have those moments, get those smaller moments at the elementary level, because we only see them once a week. Then as they transition to Brown, it's every other day. And then once they come to the middle school, especially in seventh and eighth grade, it's every day. So the goal is for them to be able to constantly reflect on their own progress. And when they get to the high school, it becomes a little bit more aggressive. You now have honors classes. You have all of these expectations now, right? So it's trying for them, the student, to have their own balance and their own
It's
growth.
really interesting to kind of look back and think when we first started writing curriculum with the capacities. The big question was, how am I gonna teach kids self-awareness? And the idea is that you don't teach them, you give them opportunities to grow in their self-awareness. And this is a great example of that. Self-awareness is also one of our newer reimagined capacities, because that came out of the iteration that was in 2019. So when we revisited all the capacities, self-awareness came one of those community agreed upon indicators that they really wanted to see growth in, because that does impact everything, all of our skills.
But I think it's interesting at the high school, and going back a slide, self-awareness is almost never in the high school PBAs. However, almost all of my teachers selected self-awareness as their evaluation goal.
Big
And
this
they
year,
are
mine
right,
too.
really working with their students on how to take accountability and follow through and changing their classroom routines to get that on the students. Some of them have like not a pre-self-assessment at the beginning of the unit and then at the end of the unit with you based in the I can statements from ACTFL for world language. But some of them are also about skills, right? That I can locate my packet every day, right? Kind of skills to just kind of keep them in tune to that.
And to tie it in, the bigger piece about this is that this is all curriculum that we created. So we can monitor and have that ability to transition, see what are those opportunities that we can have them. Now, okay, take some ownership to your own learning and let's reflect on it. So I think for us, when we see the trajectory of how we've been instructing, and now it's okay, like, here you go. It's like, now teach us, because I always say, I'm not the keeper of all the answers. We have each other, right? So we need to be able to use each other as a resource as well. This is a great resource for us to use. Our notebooks in the classrooms are great resources for them to use as well. So it's like an ongoing learning.
I think it was also clear during the revision slide of how you were talking about how you sat down and really kind of dug deep to find out what, what's working, what's not working, and really decide, making decisions around that. So you're not only expecting that of the students, but you're walking the talk as well. And I think it's so important to show kids like we're always, trying to get better, and we're always trying to, but you can only do that by looking within and then learning where you can grow. I think it's wonderful. Thank you.
So this is hopefully a familiar document. This is our district breakout rubric for analysis. And we just wanted to remind you of this and how this one intentionally has these long lists with the slashes and, this sort of all-encompassing language, but it's certainly not friendly to your average kindergartner. And, even it's not always comprehensible to all of our high school students. We wanted to just remind you of this and then show you how this evolves.
So you can notice at the elementary, and at the middle, the focus is obviously in students being able to understand the expectation of the assignment, correct? So it's in, kid-friendly terms. We looked at this numerous times and trying to find ways that a student could just pick up something and be able to do it and have, again, that ownership. So if you notice, the first section is about analyzing just for third grade Spanish. The second section is analyzing Spanish in the 6th grade level. And as we progress to honors, it's Spanish.
You have to read it yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You have to, and then in the target language, that's the goal.
Yeah.
Right.
And so when we get to the high school, not in year 1 and 2, but once we hit 3 or certainly 4, the rubrics are in Spanish or in the target language. And we have left the one column blank intentionally as an area for feedback. And yeah, so we're, highlighting, right? So we have to stress some extra things because it's in the target language. So you see in that 4, it's, some words are italicized to really kind of emphasize like, no, you have to notice these pieces, please. This is what we're looking for. Okay, similarly, yeah, here's the district breakout rubric for citizenship. Again, with, long lists and all those slashes and things in the 3, but only get into the grade level assignments.
You'll notice that kindergarten is very simple and simplistic. Something that we could talk to them and they would understand the task. And then as we progress, again, we have 2 samples, one for Spanish and one for French at the high school level. And they are in the target language.
Yep, so in the Spanish 3 assignment, they have to make a video taking on the role of a hero, a Hispanic hero who they have researched. So that's really the challenging thing to do, but also speak to how, why that person is a hero, what have they done to help their community, either locally or globally. And in French for honors, I do not speak French. Which one is this? This is about analyzing, finding a global challenge and then making a poster to giving commands of how the community can change their behavior to help solve this problem.
And just to piggyback, to go backtrack to the kindergarten, kindergartners are learning how to be a good Spanish classroom citizen. When a new friend joins the classroom and we speak Spanish, so they have to look and using their skills to understand what are some of the correct ways of introducing themselves and being polite and being respectful.
So just to show you, I had said that we kind of changed the structure of some of our PDAs to help them be more application based. So this is a completed notes page from a student. It's actually just a portion of it. So we give them this template that's saying, here's all the information you need to find, right? So in this one, they are assigned a country where they choose a country and they need to create a like a tourist pamphlet that is suggesting, giving important advice for tourists of, where they ought to go visit and trying to persuade them to visit certain places. So they need to explain why these places are interesting, what can be learned, what activities can be done there, any particular information that they might need to know to travel safely, that type of thing. So here we have a completed notes page, just bulleted list, right? You can see we've got places, but they're not really complete sentences. And then this is what it became. So this piece of it, so that notes page, I review, I make sure that all the information on it is acceptable, that they're not sneaking in complete paragraphs somehow. They can preload it with their images, but they also were allowed to draw. And then this is done in class in like a more of a testing environment. So it's truly application based and seeing what can you come up with. This very first sentence is, I advise that you visit this national park because it's a perfect day trip. It's a perfect day trip, translating on the spot.
Yeah.
I'm proud that I can
You
do
can do
that.
that. No, pretty far.
But
is
that,
very-
right, this is a subjunctive expression, so that's a very, it's phrased differently in Spanish than it is in English. So this is a really high level of fluency, actually, and this is paragraph length discourse. This would be at least intermediate mid,
Yeah, I was gonna say.
which is, you know, what they need for the seal by literacy, and this is a sophomore, so they're doing really, really well.
Which segues into the next
Yeah.
slide.
Yeah, so speaking of seal by literacy, this is not really in the curriculum, but it does reflect how strong our curriculum is. We started the seal by literacy 3 years ago, and so far, we already have 87 members of the class in 2024 who have earned 90 seals of literacy in 5 languages. And we have another testing where a handful of seniors will, so that number will go up a little bit more. So this has grown tremendously. I saw one statistic that said after 420 hours of language study, 14% of students should be able to pass the reading proficiency at intermediate mid. And we are blowing that out of the water. Like, really, now they have more than 420 hours of Spanish, but less than that in Latin. And not much more than that in French.
Yeah.
Mandarin is a different beast. Mandarin takes 3 times as many hours to learn than any of the other languages. We're not seeing much. We have had a few in Mandarin, but they're few and far between, mostly native speakers. And they shouldn't be able to do it. So that's not at all a criticism of the course or the curriculum at all. Like, they should not, like, that would be ridiculous. If anyone were at that level of proficiency after 4 years of Mandarin study, it's like 2,200 hours together in Mandarin and like 500 to 700 in Spanish and French. So, big difference, but you know, we're certainly seeing higher percentages of students in Spanish than in the other languages. And that makes sense because they're starting it sooner. So, you know, again, I thank you again for your support of having our languages taught from a very young age. It makes a massive difference. And I know that's been a challenge with, you know, to have an elementary teacher, but I hope that continues to be supported because it's paying off. And we also have had a number of heritage speakers test in a number of different languages. And all but one of them passed. Korean did not pass, but it was because they didn't know how to use the Korean keyboard. And then the student either moved or graduated and never got to retest. So I think they would have made it the next time. But I think that's really cool too, that, you know, we have, I think, a little bit more diversity sometimes than we realize, and that. I agree with that. We had one student get it in 3 languages. It's crazy. I don't know.
That's incredible.
Yeah, right, we have another 40 students testing in a couple weeks. But cool.
Great success. So lots
Shout out.
to celebrate.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's our core team.
There's your writers,
Those
those
are,
are your teachers and your writers. You know, all putting in time and energy to own the success.
And it's everyone, right?
Every
Every single person participated. It's huge. We even had a student teacher help with Mandarin.
Yeah.
On last year, I would not have been able to do it without her. She was amazing.
It's hard to write curriculum by yourself, so if you're a teacher who teaches Mandarin, Paul Curran, it's really difficult to write alone, so filling in as a student teacher who speaks Mandarin was a great gift. And I think you've seen presentations before where Davy Bryan, who's our Latin teacher, will jump in with a colleague to write American Sign Language. So curriculum writing is kind of, there's a lot of generalists that are developing, so they understand the elements of curriculum, and they're really good cross-content people, so. That's another celebration.
It's huge.
We were reflecting back to the painful lift of the first time compared to the second time, and just how neat it is that everybody. Really, I mean, I think the beautiful thing to me is that the second round, when you're asked the question, do you need to go in and work on your curriculum, or do you want to change units? If curriculum wasn't being actively used in Madison, that board would be blank. Because they wouldn't see the value in writing the curriculum and opting into that process again. So this is all of them valuing the work of curriculum, not because I say so or they say so, but because they're using it, because it's valued for our teachers.
I think the initial process was overwhelming
Mhm.
because we didn't really have a structure or something to go about how to present it or what is it supposed to look like. We had nothing. And I feel like we were almost like in the beginning stages of what the curriculum edits and processing and revisions should look like, right? So as we progress this time around, everyone's, oh, I know, like everybody's like, no, I know exactly what okay, it was a different feel. And I felt like not only what is it, the increase in participation as to a direction of, I know exactly what needs to take place, but it was a process that was able to successfully be completed in a time, at least, timely manner. So for us, it was huge.
So I know we have another agenda item, but I wanted to make sure that you could ask whatever questions you wanted to for.
And I brought samples too, the analyzing, if you wanted to look at that. Yes, I'll leave those behind so that you can look at them.
Yeah.
That's it for the elementary grade levels.
I did not bring.
No, but that's okay. You had an example up there. It's perfect. It's perfect. But I just wanted to show you because some of these units, as again, this is like a labor of love. And the processing of what we thought should be some of the things that we wanted to change, we were like, let's change it. Let's pilot what we thought would be a great presentation of a unit. So I do have some of that. That was from last year for third grade. And then these two units are brand new this year. And we were able to push it through to see what it would look like. So I do have some input for you to look at.
I just want to also say that, when you look at those names and to Gail's comment about how you wouldn't see that if it wasn't the way that it is, but I also want to say that there's a culture and a climate here that is collaborative. And I think that, like you were saying, the second time around, you're able to reach back and pull in the people who it's new, but you're cheerleading, you're working together. There's just cohesive bonds that are being made. And I think it's so important to recognize that. It might seem like, oh, doesn't everybody do that? They don't. And I think it's so important to highlight the fact that there's a culture here in Madison that is about collaboration. And Gail, I'll tip my hat to you on that because you do set a tone for a collaborative spirit, and I think, and Craig as well. And I think, when it comes to curriculum writing, that's hard work. It's like putting together a puzzle with no picture. Dump the puzzle out.
Yeah.
Like, where are we going? Like, where do we start? But I think when you have each other and there's a spirit of collaboration, it's everything. And I really appreciate the work that you do and that you do and that you do to pull people up and let them know you're welcome in this work, whether you're day one or day 101. So thank you so much.
Appreciate that. I mean, I think too, we've had an opportunity where we've had high school teachers come down to the middle school to teach. And to be able to have that ability to
That's
be
great.
able to be like, oh, wait a minute, you guys are doing that now? And it was one of those eye-opening experiences that Jen and I, when we meet regularly, we try to meet every month for just to see what's going on, how are things working. She realized, wait a minute, these units might be too easy. So that's when she made that comment about the freshmen Spanish. She realized that these are just, whatever you're doing is working, which is great. I mean, like, let's continue that process. Now we have to shift and make those changes. And we've noticed that when we first did revisions, it started at the elementary level, like it was baby steps. And then, once we progressed now, it was like we were revising all of our grade level units. Because we realized the rigor behind it of us creating it and the students really engaged about this, going on an adventure, exploring, learning. They found it fascinating and we had to make it,
Yeah, but what's
depth.
also really noteworthy is that I've been here for 19 years. So I've seen a lot of change from the students. And the students are coming in actually making more mistakes, but different mistakes. And more importantly, they're much more communicative. And if we think about language acquisition, right? Many parents, I think, here, they're kids and they start talking and it's a mess. Their grammar is disastrous and who cares? You can understand what they say as long as they're saying it. And the more they say it and practice it, it will get better over time naturally. So one of the biggest obstacles to language acquisition that we had faced in the past is they won't talk. It's silent. They won't say anything. They want to give one-word answers. They want to script what they're saying. They want to read it. They want to be perfect and they're afraid to make mistakes, right? So the work that's been done at the elementary level and the middle school level to overcome that and to get them comfortable speaking as incorrectly as they want from a young age
Exactly.
has really built. I had a student in the lab who couldn't remember the word for leave. He didn't know the word leave, but he wanted to talk about the leaves of the trees. And he's having this whole conversation with someone saying the green part of the tree, that he's referring to it as the green part of the tree, but did it in Spanish. And that's what we call circumlocution. And that's the most important skill to be developed in language for production. And that it's,
And
it's really works
The one
well.
little thing that I wanted to just mention, while we were doing this revision, there are 4 areas of growth that we wanted to measure, right? So you might be a great reader, you might be a great speaker, you might be a great writer, you might be a great listener. That's great, but you also need to be strong in the other areas. Like you can't always be writing. I mean, you need to have that conversation. You can't always be listening. You need to be doing, the reading, So the focus for us became on those 4 areas of measurement. So throughout the K-8 and then leading into the high school, we looked at those areas to try to focus on those 4 content structured areas for our students to grow in, not just be strong in one.
And how long have you been doing this? Like, how long has this taken?
This is our baby, so the baby has been growing for several years.
Okay, that's what I'm.
When I started teaching here in 2005, I was handed a list of vocabulary words and said, teach this. That's
Yeah.
all I got. And when we started to change that in Gail, 2014
14,
maybe?
I think, yeah.
We were one of the first ones to go up and it was painful at first because Allison
Yeah.
Zamuda, who I grew to love,
Yes.
right, begins by
Acquired
breaking
taste.
down
Acquired
everything and calling you on everything. But she does it to make you defend it so that you know why you're teaching what you're teaching and that it matters. Once you get there and it starts to click, it's like, okay, now we know what we're doing. And
It was baby steps.
Yeah,
Baby
it was
steps.
2 years of curriculum writing, and then after that, it's like you think you're done, but you're not. It's the implementation is insane, and because we do not rely on textbooks except in very few areas, we make everything ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, every
Everything's
worksheet,
created
every
by
class
us, yeah.
activity, everything that they have. I mean, even though we try not to do a lot of worksheets, they need repetition.
And we try to get away from this, right? This is
Yeah.
the tool for us, is that, that translation piece, that's an easy access. And when COVID hit, even then, we had to kind of restructure our teaching and what our instructional approaches were going to be like, right? So that's why we kind of moved back to journaling, writing down, get it on paper. So then you see you're making those repetitions of like errors and that's okay, but you're getting your thought across, right? I care what you're thinking about. I don't need
Yeah.
to know the spelling.
But I can
Everything.
show you.
Sorry, did you have a
Can't have it
question?
yet. These are the final exams for Spanish 6 honors. They had to read a story that they've never seen before, that was accompanied by scholarly articles that are at a way beyond a college level. I mean, college professors are writing these scholarly articles in Spanish. They're reading, I give them fragments so that they don't have to read the whole thing. And they have to write an essay and it has citations in it. And they're referring to things, and this is a college level writing. And I made them handwrite it because
That's the best, the best.
it's what they can do, right?
I
And
can feel
so,
that.
yeah, there's some orange, I don't care.
Sorry. We're at that.
Proud of that.
I'm gonna have to interrupt you to review
Of course.
other things on the agenda.
You can tell that.
But before we do that. And I wish we had more time. And I wish I had the proper words to underscore how important I think this is and how much it came through in your presentation. To parallel what Kathy said. Okay. what comes through and what I take from this presentation, and I read through all the materials and you know, and I really appreciate the work. But what just shines through this is the power of what it means when people own their curriculum and have an investment in it and understand it deeply. Because ultimately, what that translates into, and you said it in so many ways, it translates into the student experience and the student learning. And the gap, you know, and I've been in this business a long time, so I look at it and I go, there was what languages used to be. What was language used to be and still exists in many schools, which is you get through the course, you learn the vocabulary, you pass the test, you get the credit, and you move on. You know, and that's what it was for a long time. You know, the fact that you're building cultural understanding and you're building and paying attention to profiles of the graduate. I mean, all of those pieces are so important, but what's most important is I know what student energy means. I mean, what teacher energy means to student understanding. And this process nurtures and cultivates that. And among the board, we have increasingly over the last couple of years referred to that as the Madison approach. And what does that mean? That in Madison, we create curriculum and celebrate teacher investment in that process because we believe it results in profound student learning. And that, you know, you can't fake that. You know, and this wasn't just a presentation to the board showing the curriculum. This is what we've been working on. This is what we're invested in. And it's all based upon we see progress in students. So I thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
You know, it continues to be inspiring and I love to see that work, you know, and I want anybody who sees this or hears about that to understand, to focus on that dynamic. This is what happens when teachers own their curriculum. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And if you wouldn't mind leaving the samples.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Committee after this, so we can
No problem.
check out the work and I'll make sure I get it back.
Thank you.
Exams are impressive though, it's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Not how I learned. Yeah. No. And then I conjugated the verb. Got it?
It's not how I learned
Don't forget it.
to
Don't forget it. Don't forget when you pass. Our course.
I took a regents, so.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
so much. No enthusiasm at all.
So I have an introductory statement for the next part of our agenda. I think as many of you know, I meet, you know, at least once a month, usually every couple of weeks with Gail to discuss agendas and curriculum issues to help guide this committee. The right to read legislation, I feel, is very much in our wheelhouse as a curriculum committee and as a Board of Education. And, you know, it's something I follow, that I've studied and I continue to be involved in. But I believe it is critical that the full board have as comprehensive an understanding of this and its implications. You know, and it's a moving issue. But I anticipate it's an issue that may call on the board overall to take an active role, position, and to figure out where we are on it. So toward that end, I looked at either a full workshop with the board or within the curriculum committee to have a presentation. And my idea in terms of the curriculum committee was to have us as a committee see if we can come to a consensus in terms of just the idea of, is this important that the entire board needs to have, and does the curriculum committee bring it forth as something that we need to be fully informed on? So you know, that's where my thinking comes on this, and, you know, this one, you know, I'll turn it over to Gail, but I wanted to understand where it was coming from.
Thank you. I don't know, Dr. Cook, if you want to say anything before I share the information that we shared.
No, I know we only have about 10 minutes or 9 minutes, but so I won't take up too much time. I just know this has been something the board has heard, you know, about for almost 2 years now, and it's really been a focus of our work. We're still committed. I would say we're frustrated at times, but very committed to making sure that you know, our reading program maintains what we see in place now. And you know, as you saw the excitement from our foreign language teachers, world language teachers today, that's the excitement we see in our elementary teachers. And I don't want to take that away. And I feel like that's what this would do, on top of spending a lot of money to get us no farther along, and probably not really where we are now is I would be willing to, you know, stake a bet that that's what would happen. And so you know, I think that I'll let Gail have the rest of the time, and we're open to whatever the committee decides, whether it's another committee meeting or we want to try and find a board time to do an extended presentation. We're open to whatever the board would like.
I'm just gonna highlight a few pieces of our meeting, just to give you some understanding of the legislation that's in place and you know, where the legislation changed throughout the waiver process. And the feedback that we got in terms of just a rubric and a rating that would tell us where we didn't get approved, and places where we did. So basically, I just wanted to start out with the Public Act that drives this, and you'll see that starting right here in this paragraph. And the words in teal, that word shall and comprehensive, were actually amendments made to the legislation after the waivers were submitted. So all of the districts had to submit the waivers in February of 2023. And then in June of 2023, some of the language highlighted in blue changed in the legislation. And that's important because now the waivers were being viewed through the current language, which happened during the summer. So that word comprehensive is important, and the word shall is important. The highlighted yellow words, evidence-based, scientifically based. And then the areas of reading, fluency, vocabulary, rapid automatic name or letter name fluency, and reading comprehension were areas that were not found to meet the state standards. However, phonemic awareness and phonics were approved. So I concentrated in that meeting on that language to really look at what that means. And what they said is right here, which is really important, is that your modeler program is evidence-based and scientifically based and focused on competency. This word competency in the following areas is really important. So it begs the question, what does evidence-based and scientifically based mean, and what does competency mean? So I put on my paralegal hat and I went into federal legislation to see what federal legislation defines as evidence-based. And in the evidence-based federal legislation, you can see the definition of evidence-based in this white section is all around real quasi-experimental studies or evidence from well-designed studies. So this is true, deep scientific studies. So if I am a producer of a product, if I am a company that is a publisher, then I hire people to do this kind of research on my product. And the research that's been done on these products is done prior to the pandemic. So all of these studies proving effectiveness of anything that's currently listed on the state approved site, that's materials, has met those standards through pre-pandemic outcomes. The important part is this part in yellow, this or, and I'll have you read that, or a rationale based on high quality research findings or positive evaluation that it's likely to improve student outcomes. This is important because in the Madison waiver, we had 3 separate researchers from all sides of the debate, analyze our application, analyze our curriculum, and give us feedback to tell us if we were deficient in any area, and write letters of recommendation to the state that they have done this work. Those three researchers are Dr. Ben Powers. He's associated with Haskins Laboratory at Yale, definitely an expert in dyslexia. Dr. Rachel Gabriel from UConn, who is a incredible researcher who's done a lot of published work. And then Dr. Timothy Rosinski from Kent State University, who is one of the top researchers in fluency and vocabulary, cited as one of the top 2% of researchers internationally from a Stanford University study back in 2022, I think. So really credible people. And these literacy experts, we have quotes from them talking about how we're scientifically based and evidence-based and why they deem that. So there's paragraphs from Ben and from Rachel Gabriel and Dr. Tim Rosinski. We shared that with the state. We said that's why we're evidence-based and research-based. That's our evidence. So then it begs the question, like, what does it mean if you are proficient? What does that mean? So when you're looking at those subcategories of literacy that they said did not meet their standards, that vocabulary, that fluency, that reading comprehension, what is the threshold that we need to meet? And on the state website, they have some resources for you to look at curriculum materials. And one of the resources that is widely used is the Reading League guidelines. And they begin with 5 important preliminary statements. And the last statement reads, if 85% of students are not achieving proficiency in foundational areas with a tier 1 curriculum as measured with a reliable and valid curriculum-based measure, the first assumption should be that something vital is lacking in the program or its implementation, not the students. And you can see a small number of students. That difference between 84% and 85% can be a fractional student. But this 85% threshold is quite high. And when we look at our data, we draw an 85% line and we look at our state-approved universal screen. And you can see this is our kindergarten class most impacted by the pandemic, 2019, 2020. And here they are in 2020, 2021, 2021, 22, 22, 23. And they're well above that 85% proficiency. And when you take a look at the high needs subgroup, which is the most at risk, you see similar climbs and results. So I probably have about 15 more charts that I could show you that take it item by item, but they're all meeting 85% or over. And I would certainly think that the state would recognize that as evidence of proficiency. So those are the, that's kind of the overview of the law and just some of the data that we took a look at, and our plea to the state to reconsider our application. So I turn it back over to the committee for discussion. So,
Can we sue them?
So,
I don't understand.
so we don't think that's the right tack, because we would have to be on our own for that. So that would mean a Madison specific
Right.
suit, because the everyone's waiver application is different, specific to the district. And so other districts may have similar programs to us, but they don't have 85% at mastery. They don't have 3 experts that review the reading program. And so we think ours is specific. So that was our legal advice. I think it's through the legislators that where we need to have change. We need to have what I believe our legislators thought they were voting on when they talked about a waiver, which was that districts that were performing well, that would be considered. And so what we hear from the state is that they're not considering performance, but the reason they're doing this is for performance. You know, they're concerned with the performance of kids reading in the state, but they're not going to consider individual district performance. So it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like I said, there's a lot of frustration on our part. Gail and I met with all the K-3 teachers last week, and I thought they were in good spirits. Asked some of the same questions the board's been asking. But you know, steadfast in keeping with what we were doing, not wanting to change and appreciating, you know, the board's support. I shared with them at each meeting, at both the different staff, that the board is supportive of what the teachers are doing now. And it's not looking to change to satisfy the state. So they were very appreciative of that, I thought.
And we're appreciative that you passed that message on to them.
So what can we do?
Talk to John Michael and Christine Cohen. You know, other legislators. Cabe has been very supportive. Caps, you know, but I think for the board members, it's Cabe and it's our local legislators. And then just, you know, continuing to support Gail's work and everything we're doing. And you know, we would look to, like we said, present to the board or this committee for a full meeting, you know, kind of where things are at. We're hoping to hear back, you know, from the state at this point.
So individually or as a board, do you want us to reach out to these individuals?
I think if the board is all on the same page, that would be powerful for the whole board.
Just have the whole board.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a lengthy letter or anything like that. I think it's something Gail and I could pen for you, and the board was willing to do that, and it could be another piece of support.
I think that's a good idea.
I mean, I think that's the kind of thing I'm looking to have come out of the curriculum committee and a recommendation to the full board and see if we can get consensus on that stuff. Because
I think it's important.
can't overstate, you know, the presentation on the world language, I thought was a great example, you know, I mean, it's, that's is
We're
what,
lucky to have.
that is what is at
So
stake in this process.
So lucky to have our own curriculum.
You know, but if the day comes, and the day has come, where the state starts saying, not only these are the learning outcomes, but this is the curriculum and these are the packages you have to use, then you don't see this.
And you don't see anything, but.
Thank you, thank you, Gail. And we are adjourning at 6:33.